Hello, Neil from Diagonal Move here. We are in 1935 with a Second World War on the horizon in our playthrough of Cataclysm. In this version of the Second World War, tensions are bubbling under. There's been no real overt aggression from any side at the moment, with the exception of the Chinese Civil War, which has ended by fair means or foul in a communist side victory, and the Japanese side have tried to invade into some of the Chinese provinces and did such a terrible job that they almost caused a political collapse, issue, challenge in the Japanese government. Overall, though, it's very much a case of everything building up slowly towards what will eventually be the outbreak of the war. On the eastern side of the map, which is sort of the European theatre on the left-hand side as we look at it here, the Rhineland has been remilitarized by Germany, not once but twice, because I forgot that I'd done it the first time. The collapse, if you like, of French control throughout Eastern Europe has opened up some space for Italy and Germany to start thinking about, maybe making some gains in that area. But the Italians' Abyssinian adventure did not go very well, meaning they still only have that one resource available to them each turn. The communists in the Soviet Union itself still haven't quite managed to bring themselves to a connected supply line across the Urals. Hopefully we'll get to do that this turn with the Trans-Siberian Railway. But we are sort of thinking, as this is the side I'm playing, we're sort of thinking about how we can make the most of that communist victory in the Chinese Civil War. The British, for their part, and the French, they're trying to make an alliance. A few failed attempts, to be honest. There's been some failed attempts at a diplomatic takeover of certain regions as well by a few sides. Pretty lackluster all round in that sense. The Americans are really hamstrung politically until things start really building up in either the Pacific or the European theatres or both. And so they're kind of just in this position where they've got a lot of stuff to do, but they can't really get any of it started because on the one side, in the European theatre, you have the status quo marker out, which means there's no flags for them, political actions, and they can't really do a great deal in terms of getting together with France and the UK. Meanwhile, over on the Pacific map, the Washington Naval-Japan Naval Treaty essentially means that there's no Pacific Fleet movements available, or even any Pacific Fleet's builds. Now that's as much as a problem for the Japanese as it is for the Americans, but the difference is the Japanese can break that treaty at any time, and the Americans have to wait until essentially there's a war. So what's next? Well, we'll see. The first thing we'll do is, as before, we'll go through the production and the build phase and that kind of thing. Then we'll dive into the actions, drawing things from the cup. I've decided to speed things up very, very slightly, as this is going to be potentially a very long running series at the speed I'm being able to film it. And so I've sped up a little bit by already gathering the resources for all the different countries. And I'll just move, as we look at the screen now, from the top left to the bottom right, and we'll go from there. So the US, as I mentioned, they are politically hamstrung, but they do have a tremendous amount of resources. Can't really spend them because they haven't got the political will to move to rearmament. And that really, I suppose, something I should have covered a moment ago, is the fascist powers are all now at rearmament, meaning there's more stuff available to them and they're that bit closer to the outbreak of war. All the democracies and the communists not yet there. They're all at civilian, which is a big problem for the Americans because they cannot really do a great deal. They already have to give a resource to the Japanese as part of the trade agreements they have, meaning they have something like 7 resources that they can potentially spend. Nothing really to spend it on. So the first thing we'll do with those 7 resources, which are currently in the production holding box, is we'll end up spending 4 of them to build a fleet for next turn. That currently will eventually have to go into the European side of the map. It's going to cost 4 because the democracies are at civilian, and the conversion rate for resources to builds is 2 to 1, and it costs 2 builds to do the fleets. One of the few things that costs 2. And also to add insult to injury, that will actually come onto the map next turn, not this turn. So let's get rid of those 4 offensive or resources and pop the fleet there onto the turn track for 37-38. And the other 3 remaining markers will have to be these offensives, which is the triangles, the arrows, which means we now have 4. We had 1 retained from last time. We could put at least one of those on, well, one of those onto the reserve, but honestly, I don't know what we would do with them at the moment, so they're going straight into the cup. The French then. The French have an interesting position. They have 2 resources coming to them. They have 2 flags available, which is good because they're retained from last turn. So they've got a little bit more political oomph behind them. What they do have, though, is a rapidly collapsing control in the Eastern Europe, and quite an exposed kind of colony out in Indochina should the Japanese ever get up and running with their slow progress down the mainland of China and what is now Vietnam, Thailand, that kind of area. So what will we do with those builds? The French do have the same limitations on their resource expenditure as the Americans, in the sense that it's 2 resources per build, and we only really have the fleet available to us as the French, but we do have a special counter for us being the French, which is the Dreadnought refit, which allows us to spend resources on fleets and essentially reduce the cost of them down to just 1 build. So that will be both those 2 resources spent. The fleet will also go onto the track for the next year, and those 2 political actions, which are retained from last year, they don't gain 1, will go onto the reserve track and into the cup. The Dreadnought refit marker can just go off to one side because it's out of play. The British also have a retained flag, and they have 4 resources because of their empire on the Pacific map, and also their colonies in Canada, and then the resources available in London. So they have 4 resources, nothing to build, which is great. But they do have a flag, so the flag will go onto the reserve track there, and all of those resources will become offensives. Conversion rates of 1 to 1 because they are civilian. Well, the conversion rates for offensives are always 1 to 1, but they're civilian, and they'll all go into the cup. So we've got a whole bunch of military potential and not a lot to do with it right now because we're just not politically willing enough. Communists then have challenges of their own. They have 2 resources and a flag retained from last year. They're at civilian, so they do have that same issue with the resource conversion, but they can spend both those resources to build the Air Force, and then they can place the retained flag, because they also do not get a flag as standard just yet, but they will have the plane go into the cup. Interesting thing with the communists is that they have this kind of posture down the bottom that makes life so much more difficult than it needs to be, but that's sort of representing the different things that happened during those early sort of Stalinist years pre-war, and really what we're currently at now is the military reform posture, which limits our political actions. So we need to move that to either political purge or collective security, which pushes our ability to do things politically. And I think the one we're going to go for is the collective security, which, if memory serves, top of my head, and I probably will have to look this up when the time comes, if memory serves, we will be able to do more diplomatic actions at no penalty by doing the collective security, because we want to try to expand this control here. That's probably the main thing to do. Possibly the Baltic states over on the eastern side, but that would be a provocation against Germany, which we don't really want to do right now, to be honest. Playing very defensively. Okay, Speaking of Germany, they rearmament. Pardon me, that's a gibberish phrase there. But they moved from civilian commitment to rearmament, meaning they've got a stack of stuff. Their resources are now a straight 1-to-1, and they have 2 flags because they do gain flags at the start of the turn at this point. So we will spend those 2 resources on 2 armies, which we will pop into the cup, and then one of those flags will go on the reserve and the other one will go into the cup. Now the reason the Germans get flags and most of the others don't is to do with their special rules. So special rules for Germany is the Knight of the Long Knives, which allows them to gain 2 flags. Because we have the status quo, France and the UK only gain a flag if they're willing to undergo a stability test, which is a bit, maybe we could do that, but I've decided not to. Similar challenge for the Soviet Union, and I believe the Americans have a similar flag rule as well, which I'll just look up just in case. Same thing, status quo, democratic powers cannot gain a flag during the admin phase. However, France and the UK can choose to attempt a stability test in order to gain one. So that's, banging my head on the light there. The Americans really are stuck politically. Okay, where were we? Germany. Germany's done. Moving over to Japan. Japan have some resources, they have some stuff to build, and they have a flag. So the flag will go onto the reserve track. The resources will be spent at a conversion rate of 1-to-1. What will we build? Who knows? We're going to have to get rid of that Washington Naval Treaty, I think, in order to be able to do anything. However, do I do that now, or do I wait until we're at mobilisation and the conversion rate goes down to 2 builds for 1 resource? Let's put those in as military actions. We can try and do something in China, or worst comes to the worst, we'll start coming down the coastline towards the Philippines, or what's now the Philippines. Okay, that's everybody with the single exception of Italy, who still have that 1 resource available to them, which we will spend on an army going to the cup. The Olduce flag will go onto the reserve because they really need to get that Abyssinian adventure off to a flying start if we at all can. Now the Abyssinian adventure, though, if I recall correctly, is military actions, which means what I've just done may not be the most applicable thing, but worst comes to the worst, they'll invade Yugoslavia for the resource there. Okay, cool. Let us now begin with the action phase. All of the counters previously required are all in there, so I'll just give this a good shake, be a bit noisy for a moment, and see how we go. So the first one out of the cup is the military. It's a military action for the Japanese. Okay, let's just check what we can do. The obvious thing we can do is try to get into one of the provinces in China. We tried that last time, failed miserably, but the resources in Hebei and Jiangsu there do look pretty promising. So we'll do that. Same thing as before. We still cannot augment because we're not at mobilisation, which is quite frustrating. I just realised I forgot to put their army into the books. So it's 1-to-1, so we cannot augment, which is, like I said, very frustrating. However, we will use the army with the support from the Air Force there. So air superiority goes to us, which means we roll 3 dice instead of 2. There's no tank or anything like that to worry about. We're definitely in supply, so I think we just roll 3 dice for us, 2 dice for the local communist army, and go from there. Yep, I think we've accounted for everything. There's no adverse terrain, that's the speckly stuff, so I think we're good. We'll just roll the dice, see what happens. So 3 for Japanese, thanks to their air superiority, and 2 for the communists, which would be red, but representing here China. And we have a terrible result again for the Japanese. We ignore the two lower numbers for the fascists and the lower number for the communists, meaning we do have a higher total for the communists, who really do not want to give up that province at all. And then, if I recall correctly, the losses are ones divided by the other, rounding down, and that will mean the loss for the fascists. But I'll just double check to make sure I've got that completely correct. Yep, that's right. That Japanese army gets pushed back. And there will be a period of aftermath where we do a bunch of stuff that's not applicable because we don't have any cubes there. Land units do go back to where they came from, which in this case was Manchuria, leaving that area exposed again. Any powers that were provoked gain flags, etc. No one was provoked because there's no immediate sphere of influence from anybody for Hebei. Therefore, I do think the only thing we need to think about is the potential for triumph and disaster, which is if the combat inflicts more losses than can be applied, there's a disaster, etc, etc, etc. So we don't worry about that, meaning I think it's just a battle. There's no need for any stability test for the Japanese. Okay, so that wasn't quite the disaster that it was the last time we tried that, but really we are going to have to think about another plan because we've got another army that's no more. So moving on to the next chit, I did not do the interrupt, which I probably should have done if I had any sense whatsoever, but I forgot completely. So let's move to the interrupt. The fascists cannot interrupt at this point, meaning it's up to the democracies. I think it would be worthwhile, we still have flags, for the French to interrupt. Obviously it would normally go in order of effectiveness. For now, I'll say the communists don't wish to, the Americans can't, therefore the British and the French will combine to do the alliance, and that's going to be just a one roll, because the French only have an effectiveness of 1. That goes back there. And so 5 or a 6 is a 3. We do have the cube in the alliance political action box there, which we pushed up to a 4. Still a failure. Put another cube in that box, and the French and British still cannot agree on what they want to do. So those flags feel a little bit wasted. Maybe there was something else we could have done with those, but yeah, that's not cool right now. Right, I've added the cube to the alliance box for the French, meaning we now think about interrupts for everybody else. Oh, I kind of want to interrupt as Germany. Maybe we can start like doing some sort of diplomacy against Sweden. Yeah, let's interrupt with Germany, roll 3 dice because they're much more effective than the allies at the moment, and a 5 or a 6, and we will control Sweden, which will be a VP, but importantly a one-off resource as well. And we've got 5, so we have diplomatically taken control of Sweden, which means I need to find a cube, bear with. Right, that is Germany's first moves towards world domination, and that will mean a victory point for Germany, which will in turn mean a victory point for the fascist ideology. And more importantly, perhaps from the German point of view right now, when the next admin phase comes, that's an extra resource to pull out to build some stuff. Okay, next up, no one in the democracies can do any kind of political stuff right now, but the communists have the option to do something if they want. I've just realised actually the communists, because the successful diplomacy against Sweden is one one space away from a territory. The space of the Gulf of Bothnia does cover all the way to Leningrad's area, meaning the communists were provoked by that action. So they get a flag popping that into the cup, which means now what we might want to do as the communists is think about doing something politically via that interrupt. Now, for the communists, we can, as a political action, change that posture, which would be probably something like the political purges or something, because then that would give us an opportunity to build the Trans-Siberian Railroad, get those guys out on the Pacific map in supply, ready for anything that might happen over there. But in order to do that, we'd have to roll a 6 due to the current military reform status, meaning, so we have to roll a 6 in order to attempt that action now of moving the political posture and then another one to try to build the Trans-Siberian Railroad. I think right now it might be worth not interrupting and waiting until we have our home front test. And the reason for that is the home front test is an opportunity to automatically change your posture as the Soviets. Now, what I'm looking for hurriedly on this rather large doobie-doo here is what we can do in order to do something politically. Stability is pretty good for them. Don't really want to pressure anyone. I think we'll try that interrupt to increase our mobilization, because that would be super useful. Let's try that. And that's going to be 2 dice for the communists, successful on a 6 due to the political posture. And we've got a 6. Fantastic. That means we will need to put that back over here, but we do now move up to rearmament, and we will gain ourselves 4 new units that we can build. Okay, so the 4 build units I've chosen are 3 land armies and an upgrade marker. And what the upgrade marker does is it allows you to flip those land armies from their infantry side to their tank side, being much more powerful. Now, we can't do anything with those right now, but that's a big help for the future. Did that provoke anybody? I don't think so. But actually it does if it's indicated on the status card, and so we do actually provoke both Japan and Germany. Oops, probably should have thought about that a little bit more. Germany's flag will go straight onto the track for a reserve, and Japan's will go into the cup, meaning the fascists can try to interrupt. That Abyssinian adventure for the Italians seems like a good idea, because we do want that resource. However, I can't for the life of me remember how to do it, and it's on a card somewhere. Okay, here we go. It's only available when we're not belligerent, so we can't be at war, and it's a military action to invade Ethiopia. Okay, so it's a military action, not a political action, so we won't interrupt. Well, we could interrupt with a political action called, I think it's something like maneuvers, which would then allow us to do that military action, or a single military action, which would be a single dice, hoping for a 5 or a 6. I think I kind of want to wait until we've got some more actions, but we can't be belligerent, that's the trick. Let's wait, let's just roll. Sorry, not roll, let's just pull another chit out of the cup. Home front test for Russia. Okay, so that's 2d6, aiming for a 5+. political purges don't affect, or the political status doesn't affect the home front test as far as I'm aware. We passed anyway, which means that goes onto the track for next year, and the posture moves. And I think, what will I do? Let's find the appropriate card. The appropriate card says, and it's this bit here, that the military reforms which we currently are is a -1 penalty to all political actions. We do not gain a flag during the admin phase, unless we choose to try and take a test. Political purges is a -1 to all diplomacy, but obviously all the other political actions are fine. Collective security is a -1 penalty to politics, with the exception of diplomacy. That's the one I want to move to, so I'll move it to collective security. So we gain a flag, and we can do some diplomacy. We'll gain a flag during the admin phase next turn, and we'll gain some options regarding how and when we try to do some sort of manoeuvring of our own in the spheres of influence that we have. Okay, fascists, do they want to interrupt? Yeah, why not? Let's be Germany, and Germany can interrupt. We would do this in order of effectiveness with Germany at the top. So Germany will interrupt with their flag. They will also attempt diplomacy again, and this time I think we're going to attempt diplomacy on... good question. I would like to say Benelux or the Czech Republic, Czechoslovakia as it was then, because of their resources. However, Denmark's looking appealing as well. It would be a provocation against the British and potentially the French as well for Denmark, but we would control the sea area a bit more around there if we did that. But we wouldn't get that resource, and the Czechoslovakian one does look quite good, and that would be a provocation against the French only at the moment. But there is an issue there around the resistance and also the adverse terrain. So let's just double check. There goes all my player rates. Has to be an ungarrisoned country. It's ungarrisoned. Poland's also ungarrisoned. However, I think we have negative die rolls because of the fact that we've got French control in there. Time to find the rules. Okay, the country's resistance is a -1, and the fact that the French have a cube is also a -1, so that's going to be impossible to do. Okay, so I think if we do that interrupt, well, we have done that interrupt, we will need to interrupt somewhere like probably, let's just do Denmark. Denmark would work. Cannot try to do diplomacy against Switzerland because we have something called the stressor front, which essentially means the Italians and Germans can't operate in each other's sphere of influence right now. So our options really are the Baltics or Denmark. Let's go for Denmark. So that's 3 dice. Although the Baltics would give us extra places to put soldiers on the Soviet border, but I think for now let's not kick that particular hornet's nest and just go with Denmark. I really am going round and round in circles with these decisions. It may be time to end the video shortly. So anyway, 3 dice and 5s or 6s. We have a 6. That is another area now controlled by the Germans. Another VP for the Germans and the fascist ideology. Denmark's now controlled. Fascist ideology has a VP, Germany gets a VP. Provocations against the Brits and the French due to the fact they are both currently 1 sea space away from the Denmark coastline. And we'll pop those onto the necessary tracks, I think. for now. Okay, thinking about where we've got to, what's happened so far in this video. We're running up to it's half an hour or so of filming, so it'll probably be about 25 minutes of video. I think it's probably time to call it a day while I have to think about what's next. The opportunity exists for the democracies to interrupt. What they would do, I'd have to think about. Okay, I think that's where we'll stop. We have the Germans pushing their way out into new territories. The Japanese are still failing to make headway into the rest of China. And yeah, the Allies, what will eventually be the Allies, really aren't very aligned. Okay, that's it for now. Thank you for watching. See you for the next part of the 1935-36 turn of Cataclysm, A Second World War.